If you hate yourself, this game is for you. The friend who gifted me this game is not a friend anymore. 14 hours in, I feel like I want to punt a baby. Well, that's enough positive reviews. How are the negatives?
Trigger warning for Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. Warning, this game triggers people.
Spring's here, the snow's gone, but we're still on the mountains. Welcome to this mountain, popularly known as Garbage Mountain, or Foddy's Mountain. You'll probably call it F this mountain. First brought to my attention in 2017 via YouTube, this game was like a Japanese curse. Those who heard of it were doomed to try their hand, and this is no easy climb. This is what is popularly referred to as a rage game. A game set up with the odds stacked against the player and consequences so high as to tilt even the most level of heads. And while I was not a tuber at the time, it got me too. Wormed its way into my head and onto my hard drive, drove me up a mountain I should have had better sense than to climb, then predictably knocked me flat on my pot, and drove me to rage quit. Yet the memory of that mountain and the dignity I left on its slopes never fully left me. Like a ghost with unfinished business, I would occasionally haunt it, poking at it from afar, rewatching playthroughs and speedruns. Why was this mountain so compelling when there were better games around and better successors in the pipeline? Why did I feel compelled to snipe at it in my videos? And why did I care enough to pick the goddamned thing back up in 2025 and then make a 20-minute long video about it? This is the Mountain of Madness, the peak that breaks gamers, the Everest of the precision platforming genre, a mountain central to my least favorite game. Getting Over It, with Bennett Foddy. First things first, if you play this game, you're in for a bad time. That's not me being cynical, that's on the box. Getting Over It is going to make you struggle, and here's how. Meet Diogenes, named for a Greek philosopher known for living in an empty wine barrel and the father of cynicism. While we tend to view cynics as people who just always have a negative view, Diogenes' philosophy was more about poverty, self-sufficiency, and rude behavior in public. No paintings of the latter that I could find. Our Diogenes doesn't live in a barrel, but his lower left is stuck in a cauldron. He also has a hammer, because this game is an homage to sexy hiking, a B game, a term I learned exclusively from Getting Over It, about climbing a mountain known for high difficulty and a lack of compromise. The first thing you'll notice is that Getting Over It's controls are highly unorthodox. Your only input is the mouse, or touchscreen if you're insane enough to play this on mobile. You control the head of the hammer, so in a way, that's your player character. If the hammer collides with something and you continue to move it, Diogenes will instead move in the opposite direction. So if you move down while the hammer is on the ground, Diogenes will move up. Likewise, left becomes right and vice versa. The shaft of the hammer has no collision, so fundamentally you have a small object you directly control and a large object indirectly controlled. And using the two, you have to get up the mountain. The starting area gives you a moment to warm up and get a sense of how movement works. But it is very simple, so you won't be here long before you're ready to progress. That's where this tree comes in, and where you might get a sense of what you're in for. Getting Over It is a precision platformer, with a very imprecise movement system. The hammer is ostensibly under your control, but its behaviors are not always intuitive. Incorrect mouse movements can result in Diogenes running into walls or flinging himself into space. Grip is also variable. You rarely get clean notches to hook the hammer on and have to make the best of slippery surfaces. Sometimes speed affects friction and sometimes angle does. It'll be up to you to figure out what works where. So even though this tree is the first obstacle, essentially a training level, it might take you a minute to get over. The game was developed, as the title suggests, by Bennett Foddy, an Australian developer with an achievement list that significantly dwarfs my own, including a doctorate in philosophy, papers on addiction, and I hope he never sees this video because I am not prepared to debate him. He also serves as your narrator, not to verbalize your progress, but more to talk about his thoughts on games, game design, and some of his slam poetry.
I guess you don't hate it if you got this far, feeling frustrated. It's underrated.
Which is pretty good, by the way. Getting Over It isn't just a game, it's also an essay. It's Foddy trying to make a thesis on game design and game culture while using the gameplay to drive his points home. It's a novel approach since only those who finish the game will hear the whole thing. You'll hear him talk during your journey. Streamers tend to yell at him.
It's a lot of progress.
Oh,
That's
thanks.
a deep frustration, a real punch in the gut.
But I found his thoughts interesting and worth pondering. Essentially, he critiques a modern design philosophy wherein challenge is theatrical, where it's expected that players will overcome them through leveling, time, or practice. Foddy expresses nostalgia for the formative years of gaming where challenges were brutal and unfair, where success was not promised. Take the chimney. A lot of new players get stuck on the chimney. The required movement is paradoxical. To get into it, you need to shove the hammer down to make Diogenes jump. Then you need to get the hammer above him to hook onto these lanterns. There isn't enough room in the chimney to fully extend the hammer, so your first few times trying, you'll likely miss and maybe even kick yourself back a ways. But let's say you do reach the second lantern. If you pull too hard, the angle of the chimney might cause you to shoot out the top and backwards, undoing a lot of progress. This is clearly intentional. You could get through the chimney by luck, but the design is intended to send you back to prove you've really gotten it. That chimney is getting over it condensed. Its challenges are brick walls, sometimes literally, that you will have to struggle past multiple times, which is how Bennett Foddy wanted it. In his narration, he describes a development process wherein obstacles that appeared too hard were not altered, the rationale being that failure was not the fault of the obstacle, but the player. Now, that's a very true-to-life aspiration. No one designs mountains, they're just there. If a face is too sheer for you to climb, that's it. You can't climb it. We don't blame the rock for our failure, so why blame the developer? Mount Pilajunk follows that philosophy, with many obstacles that are blatantly unfair with almost no room for error and a very error-prone movement system. That hammer seems to have a mind of its own, rarely doing exactly as expected and yielding inconsistent results, like the tendency for Diogenes to hold his arms close when you're trying to extend them. Or this bounce, which can catapult you across the map and happens even if you take your hands off the controls. They don't make the game impossible, and they could be considered thematic. Equipment can fail, after all, the consequences of which, while no fault of the player, can be tragic. Though thankfully Foddy did not find a way to actually kill the player should you fall. Many players may have considered that a mercy, including myself back in 2017. So let's talk about streaming.
Oh, no! Coffee cup! You Judas!
The year Getting Over It launched, I watched it played by CaptainSauce, who I watched religiously at the time. The concept was intriguing, and I think I bought it that day. I wanted to see if it was really that hard. At the time, I hadn't really entered my indie game phase yet. My game was Overwatch, and I was very close to becoming a professional player according to my horoscope. But watching a streamer play, a practice Bennett Foddy disdains by the way,
Like a baby bird being fed chewed up food.
did not prepare me for actually playing it. It's the old, you don't understand until you've done it kind of thing. Once the hammer was in my hand, my confidence evaporated. By the grace of Picard, I made it through the chimney, but lost my progress and found myself unable to do it again. I was younger then, kind of, okay, still in the latter half of my 30s, and I didn't take this repeated failure well. Foddy claims he made this game to hurt a certain type of gamer. He never defines the type, but he certainly hurt me. I touched on this during my Are You Too Dumb for Puzzle Games video. We often use our skills and achievements to bolster our self-image. I'm better at video games than any other skill or talent in my life, including the one that pays bills. And for a long time, I had no way to really express that. For example, despite fairly consistent improvement, I could never rise beyond silver rank in Overwatch. It gave me some comfort that random players thought I played better than my rank, but still, when you feel something positive about yourself but can't prove it, your confidence gets undermined. And when evidence rises that contradicts it, oh, that's so much worse. So as Getting Over It gained popularity and more people reached the top, I would poke and prod at it, trying to find some trick or sensitivity setting that would fix whatever was wrong. When that didn't work, I felt like I had to defend myself, my self-perception. If I couldn't climb the mountain, then I had to debase the value of that climb. Which is why, until this year, my review for this game was starkly negative. Of course, being me, it wasn't enough to just rage, I needed rationales, so I would pick apart the game, most distinctly the controls, but also questioning why anyone would choose to play it when games that were actually fun existed, because I needed that confidence in my gaming skill. And I still do. We all need reasons to value ourselves. If self-worth is a house, my being good at games is a load-bearing wall. Not the sturdiest thing, but still one of the strongest. I can't do without it. Now, nobody ever commented on my review, probably for the best, since without engagement I soon uncoupled from it. I moved back to Overwatch, continued my quest to prove I was pro-gamer material. Yeah, the irony is not lost on me. And that was it for about 3 years, when I climbed a very different mountain. "2020, everyone's favorite year, when I learned a valuable lesson. Masks and vaccines work. Also, that skill is something that can be earned. That might seem obvious, but when I was a kid, the word talented and gifted were thrown around a lot. There's a misunderstanding about life, that your skills are somehow predetermined and your success in any field is a reflection of that innate talent. I.e., if I can't draw, it's because I don't have a talent for art. This is a really toxic mindset to be in. It takes control of your future success away from you and forces you to judge yourself by a scale you didn't actually choose. It can get particularly bad if, confident in your innate talent, you never seek to improve. In fact, if you're too used to being the best, you might withdraw from opportunities for growth when challenged. The world is full of gifted kids who grew up to be average with their peers, or even below average. That was, in many ways, my mindset the first time I played Getting Over It. But that mindset began to crack as I started embracing the frequently more challenging indie games. And with Celeste, it shattered entirely. Celeste is also a game about climbing a mountain, and for some reason I became fixated on beating its toughest challenges. Unlike Getting Over It, Celeste's movement is razor sharp. Your control over main character Madeline is pristine, which is good because the stages are brutal. This game keeps a running death count and asks you to be proud of it. It took me 3 days of practice to beat what is arguably Celeste's hardest level, the Seaside Summit. Yep, for all 2 of you who hadn't put it together yet, that's where my name comes from. This moment wasn't just a gaming achievement for me, it was a life one, because it let me prove to myself that talent could be improved if you worked at it. A lesson that extends beyond gaming. It might seem weird to learn that so late in life, but as I've engaged with friends and coworkers, watched the children in my life growing, I've realized that we don't often emphasize how valuable practice is. So many of us are looking for a sign that we are in some way destined, a calling. And if we don't get one, we might lose our ambition. But I no longer fear that failure, because failure, I have learned, is the path to success. But I still didn't pick the game back up. Not for 5 more years. And I might never have picked it up again if not for Next Fest. One of my favorite demos this year was a game called Kickin' Hell. It's about a martial artist known for his extremely strong kicks, trying to use them to get out of hell. It plays like a first-person 3D Getting Over It. The kick mechanic is more consistent than the hammer, but the difficulty and price of failure is still very high. And I found that I really liked this game. And I liked Jump King, a similar game after seeing it in one of Carl Jobs' videos. So it turns out this might be a genre I really enjoy, enough that I kind of want to do a genre-focused video on it. But to do that, I had to address the elephant in the room. There was no way to discuss a genre inspired by Bennett Foddy without talking about Bennett Foddy, and how could I honestly talk about it if I hadn't beaten it? And so I reinstalled the game and swung my hammer. I won't go into detail about how it went, because it's mostly what I did for Pakkaret down the Bun Burrows. I played it casually, picking it up when I had some spare time and letting it rest when I became frustrated. On that subject, I never got smash my mouse frustrated, and even came to appreciate repeating old areas as the practice improved my skill. I started to learn tricks hidden beneath the surface. Even without a single new mechanic, the mountain's regions call for new skills. You can't get up the snowy slope the same way you got up Orange Hill, which can't be gotten up the same way as the chimney. There is subtlety to the hammer, and a surprising amount of depth to the movement, but it's depth that has to be earned. And after hundreds of swings, dozens of falls, 1 cheap jump scare, and about 9 total hours of playtime, I finally reached the summit. The abrupt sense of peace is almost transcendental. The struggle, the insane struggle, is over. Gravity, your constant opponent, releases you from its grasp. As you float into the heavens, Bennett Foddy takes a moment to acknowledge your achievement, and his final words are his thanks to you the player, for seeing his vision to its end. It was here, in that moment of apotheosis, that I understood. The game is about more than just challenge. It's about proving that an impossible task is possible. More so, proving you can do it. Everything that feels so wrong in this game, it's actually right, and it could not exist in any other state. Floating above the world, watching the stars drift by, I contemplated how everything I had hated, every way in which I questioned the game's intent and construction, was actually part of a grand, correct, and beautiful vision. One I had been privileged to see to its end. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is what joining a cult is like. Okay, first of all, that was an exaggeration. I do not believe Bennett Foddy is running a cult or that people who enjoy and defend the game are part of a cult. But around 48 hours after I got to the top, I noticed that my thinking had changed. This game is such a damned struggle, and overcoming it absolutely fills you with joy. The pain of yesterday becomes the happiness of today, and that happiness filled me with positive feelings towards the game. Enough that 2 hours later I did it again, this time only taking 40 minutes and feeling really good about myself. Since then I keep picking it up, because despite saying on my Discord that only crazy people would go for the 50 climb achievement, I kind of want that golden pot. But then on one climb, the hammer got weird again, sending me off into space with gentle nudges, refusing to reach up to its fullest extent no matter how far I moved the mouse. It was doing that bouncing thing again. I hate that thing, and I realized that this mountain, it blocks the view from both directions. When you're struggling, it's hard to see anything beyond what's holding you back. But once you're over the top, it's easy to forget that those problems didn't really go away, you compensated for them. There is glory in that, to be sure, much the way playing a fists-only run of Salt and Sanctuary is glorious, but it doesn't make them better. But hey, what if that was the intent? Bennett Foddy sought to make a game that emulated both the feel of real-world climbing and the unfriendly design of early games, so if the janky hammer is intentional as part of the vision, doesn't that mean it being bad in this context makes it good? That depends, doesn't it? Art is ultimately subjective. Bennett Foddy did not select a real-world mountain, he created one. This game is art, and while the hammer troubles could arguably be considered part of the overall vision and thus internally consistent, that doesn't mean the vision has to be celebrated uncritically or collectively. Also, I don't believe Bennett Foddy's narration. Specifically, the part about refusing to lower the difficulty of obstacles to preserve the sense that progress is not guaranteed. Level design is a very iterative process. No one gets it right the first time. Okay, so what if it's only little things? A touch here and there for practical reasons. Then wouldn't I just be splitting hairs? I would, but there are a few things that stuck out to me. Take this concrete barrier. It's not a 100% save, but most of the time if you fall into this hole, the barrier will stop your fall. That could have always been in the design, the game has its share of trolls after all. But I personally think playtesters were falling too often. Not just this section, but the one above it as well, funnels you right down into this area. Without the rail, you fall back to the starting zone. Did he add this because the consequences turned out to be too high? Or how about this entire zone? Up until now, the platforms have been riddled with opportunities to fall, but once you scale the rocks known as Orange Hell, it's almost impossible to fall back onto them. There are no checkpoints in the game, but the snowy rocks above will almost always land you back on the church's roof or further along. The only way to suffer a truly massive fall after this point is to ride the snake, which is fun, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Add to that the sheer polish. Despite the difficult controls and challenging terrain, I never got stuck on anything. I know it's possible, but its rarity is a credit to the level design. Put all of that together and the mountain stops feeling like a cobbled mess and more like an environment which has been very finely tuned. There is a balance here. It's not in your favor, but if Foddy had really wanted an impossible, uncompromising experience, he could have made one. I don't believe he really rejected the idea that a player's failure could be on the developer's end, because his game is way more forgiving than it lets on. I think he wanted us to get to the top, but he also wanted us to feel like we'd done it entirely on our own. And in an artificial environment like a game, that is never going to be a true possibility. So, what is at the top of the mountain? I can't tell you. Well, I could tell you, but I'm not going to, because before you do, he asks you to swear you're alone and not recording or streaming. Instead, I'll tell you about something entirely unrelated. There is a mountain in China, accessed by a very steep and treacherous climb, including sections where the wooden walkway is only wide enough for one and traffic is going both ways. If you're willing to risk your life, there's a tea house at the top. That must be a fascinating experience. Hours of toil, risk, fear, and exhaustion just to set foot inside. But when you do, you'll realize you are now part of a very select group of people. No one can come here who has not made the climb, they can only hear stories about it. And now, that includes you. You can stay for as long as you want, talking to other people in the house. Maybe you can get tips on how to get up faster or handle dangerous areas. Maybe they'll insult your mother. Either way, when you leave that behind, and the only way to have it again is to climb again. There is no back door, no elevator, and I cannot think of a better way to reward the hiker than giving them a bit of time to share that bond. The value of that simple moment becomes priceless for what it took to earn it. Anyway, sorry I couldn't show you anything about what's at the top of Getting Over It. But for those who are frustrated or angry that they haven't made it to the top, allow me to impart a bit of wisdom. This is not the only mountain in the gaming industry. I mean, hell, Dark Souls made its name by promising failure, and in the indie age, precision platformers can be absurdly difficult. It's not even the hardest mountain. The Seasides of Celeste collectively have an achievement rate of 7.6%. Meanwhile, almost 10% of players have scaled Mont Garbage. Also, there are always higher mountains to climb. Celeste has mods that add player-made D-sides, and even I am not touching those. No one achievement is going to prove anything. Not about you. So if scaling a giant pile of Unity assets is not to your liking, then just go hike elsewhere. As for me, the wonky controls combined with the high difficulty and the developer's constant commiseration have made Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy my least favorite game. But even my least favorite is still a favorite.
I'm going down the road feeling bad. Lord, I'm going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down this road feeling bad. And I ain't gonna be treated this away.
Thanks for playing, everyone.